Do not look away. Do not delay. This moment was not accidental, and your attention was not summoned without cause. You are standing at a crossroads of decision, whether you realize it or not. Forces of distraction, fear, and confusion press in from every side, whispering that tomorrow is soon enough, that silence is safer, that comfort is wisdom. They are wrong. You were not formed for retreat. You were not awakened to sleep again. You were not given vision to lower your eyes. There is a battle unfolding, not of flesh and blood alone, but of truth versus distortion, courage versus complacency, purpose versus decay. And you have been equipped, trained through adversity, sharpened by resistance, strengthened by trials you once thought would break you. Stand upright. Straighten your spirit. Lift your sight. Remember who you are beneath the noise. You have been entrusted with influence over your choices, your words, your work, your direction. What you build matters. What you tolerate matters. What you refuse to confront will grow stronger if left untouched. Now is not the hour for hesitation. Cut through deception. Reject the lie that you are small. Reject the lie that your voice carries no weight. You were not designed to blend into the shadows. You were forged to confront darkness with clarity, to bring order where chaos thrives, to protect what is just and challenge what corrupts. Act with discipline, move with integrity, speak with precision. Let your decisions be clean, let your motives be unmixed, let your courage be visible. This is your call to readiness. Be alert, be resolute, be unwavering. Advance, not recklessly, but righteously, not in pride, but in alignment with truth. The path ahead will demand strength, but strength has already been placed within you. Do not ignore this moment. Rise. Choose. Move forward, now. There are moments that arrive without warning, cutting through the ordinary flow of life like a blade through cloth. They do not announce themselves politely, and they do not wait for convenience. They demand attention, not because they are loud, but because something deep within you recognizes their weight. This is one of those moments. Urgency is not panic, and it is not chaos. Urgency is clarity arriving at speed. It is the sudden alignment of awareness and responsibility, the realization that delay carries a cost you can no longer afford to ignore. You have felt it before, even if you dismissed it. A tightening in the chest, a sharpening of thought, a sense that time has shifted and what was once distant is now pressing against the present. This is the awakening. It is not external pressure forcing you to move. It is an internal signal reminding you that you are accountable for what comes next. When urgency awakens, excuses lose their power. The mind stops bargaining, and the soul steps forward. Too many confuse urgency with fear, but fear scatters, while true urgency focuses. Fear makes you reactive, frantic, and unsure. Urgency, when awakened correctly, makes you deliberate, grounded, and precise. It strips away the unnecessary and reveals what truly matters. Suddenly distractions lose their shine. Petty conflicts fall silent. You see with unsettling clarity how much time has been spent circling instead of advancing. This awakening does not come to everyone at the same time. Some encounter it through loss, some through responsibility, some through opportunity, and others through a quiet inner command that refuses to be ignored. However it arrives, it carries the same message: you are no longer permitted the comfort of unconscious living. You are being summoned into full awareness, where every choice has weight and every delay leaves a mark. The world is skilled at numbing this awakening. Noise, entertainment, endless consumption, and constant stimulation are all tools that soften urgency until it feels like a faint echo rather than a clear call. You are told there is always more time, another chance, a safer moment. But urgency knows better. It understands that timing is not infinite, and that windows close silently, without ceremony. When you awaken to urgency, you begin to sense the invisible deadlines written into life itself. This awakening is not meant to burden you, it is meant to empower you. It restores your authority over your own direction. Instead of drifting, you begin to navigate. Instead of waiting to be pushed, you move because you choose to. Urgency reconnects you with intention. It reminds you that your presence here is not random, and that your actions ripple outward in ways you may never fully see. There is also discipline within this awakening. Urgency does not demand reckless action. It demands readiness. It asks you to sharpen your thinking, to clean your motives, to remove excess from your life. You become more selective with your time, your words, your energy. You begin to understand that not everything deserves a response, but some things demand immediate engagement. Knowing the difference is part of the awakening. Resistance often rises when urgency awakens. Old habits protest. Comfort argues for delay. The familiar whispers that tomorrow will be easier, clearer, safer, but urgency exposes these whispers as illusions. It shows you that clarity often comes after movement, not before, and that safety is rarely found in stagnation. Growth requires motion, and motion requires decision. As this awakening deepens, you may notice a shift in how you perceive responsibility. It no longer feels like an external burden imposed by others. It becomes an internal commitment to act in alignment with what you know to be right. You stop asking who will act if you do not, because you understand that sometimes the answer is simply you, not because you are superior, but because you are present and aware. Urgency also awakens courage, not the loud, dramatic kind, but the steady resolve to act despite uncertainty. You accept that not every outcome can be predicted, but inaction guarantees stagnation. Courage born of urgency is sober and controlled. It does not seek recognition. It seeks effectiveness. It values progress over perfection and truth over comfort. There is a moral dimension to this awakening as well. When urgency sharpens your awareness, you begin to see where silence has enabled decay and where inaction has allowed harm to persist. You understand that neutrality is not always innocence, and that choosing not to act is still a choice. This realization can be uncomfortable, but it is also liberating. It returns agency to your hands. Awakening to urgency means accepting that you are a participant, not a spectator. Life is not something that merely happens to you. It is something you are actively shaping, moment by moment. Even small decisions carry significance when made consciously. Urgency teaches you to treat the present as the only guaranteed terrain on which you can stand and act. As this state becomes familiar, you stop waiting for permission. You recognize that readiness is not something granted by others, but something cultivated within. You prepare not because you are afraid of being unprepared, but because you respect the weight of what is entrusted to you. You act not because you are rushed, but because you are aligned. This awakening does not fade once recognized. It becomes a steady undercurrent, guiding your choices and sharpening your awareness. You learn to move with intention, to speak with purpose, and to act with resolve. You are no longer lulled by delay or distracted by noise. You are awake, and you understand that this moment right now is not insignificant. Urgency has spoken, and once heard, it cannot be unheard. Standing in truth and integrity is not a posture adopted for appearance. It is a condition of alignment between what you know, what you say, and what you do. It is an inner coherence that cannot be faked for long, and cannot be sustained without vigilance. When you stand in truth, you refuse the convenience of self-deception. When you stand in integrity, you refuse the temptation to fracture yourself for approval, advantage, or ease. Together, they form a foundation that does not shift when pressure is applied. Truth is not merely information or accuracy, it is recognition. It is the willingness to see what is real even when it unsettles you, even when it contradicts what you hoped would be true. Standing in truth requires humility, because it demands that you submit your assumptions to reality rather than bending reality to protect your assumptions. It asks you to listen before you speak, to observe before you judge, and to admit when you are wrong without collapsing into shame or defensiveness. Integrity is the discipline that carries truth into action. It is what prevents truth from remaining abstract or performative. Integrity insists that your private choices align with your public statements, that your values do not change depending on who is watching, and that your standards are not selectively applied. It is consistency of character, not perfection of behavior. Integrity does not mean you never fail, it means you do not lie to yourself about failure, and you correct your course without excuses. Standing in truth and integrity often carries a cost. Comfort may be lost. Approval may fade. Paths that once seemed open may close. But what is gained is solidity. You become someone who can be trusted, including by yourself. There is a quiet power in knowing that your words are not hollow, and your actions are not contradictory. This power does not shout, it stabilizes. The world frequently rewards compromise disguised as pragmatism. You are encouraged to soften the truth to avoid conflict, to blur principles to gain access, to remain vague, so you are never held accountable. Standing in truth and integrity resists this erosion. It says that clarity is worth the friction it creates, and that short-term advantage is not worth long-term corrosion. It understands that once integrity is traded away, it is rarely bought back cheaply. Truth demands courage because it exposes you. When you speak or act truthfully, you remove the protective layers of ambiguity and pretense. You allow yourself to be seen as you are, not as you are curated to appear. This vulnerability is often mistaken for weakness, but it is the opposite. It requires strength to remain transparent in a culture that thrives on distortion. It requires discipline to remain honest when dishonesty would be easier and safer. Integrity sharpens discernment. It teaches you to recognize when something feels wrong even if it appears successful, popular, or endorsed by authority. It trains you to listen to the quiet signals of misalignment before they become loud consequences. Over time, this discernment becomes instinctive. You no longer need elaborate justification to know when a line has been crossed. You feel it immediately, and you respond accordingly. Standing in truth and integrity also shapes how you treat others. You stop manipulating through omission or half-truths. You stop using ambiguity as a shield. You speak plainly, not cruelly, and firmly, not arrogantly. You respect others enough to be honest with them, even when honesty may disappoint or challenge them. This respect builds relationships that are resilient rather than fragile, because they are rooted in reality rather than illusion. There will be moments when standing in truth isolates you, when the crowd moves in one direction, and you cannot follow without betraying what you know to be right. You may find yourself alone. This solitude can be unsettling, but it is temporary. What endures is the internal alignment that comes from not abandoning yourself. Over time, others who value clarity and consistency will recognize it in you and draw near. Integrity also governs what you tolerate. It defines your boundaries. When you stand in integrity, you do not excuse behavior that contradicts your values simply because it benefits you or spares you discomfort. You do not normalize what you know is corrosive. You may still engage with complexity, but you do so without surrendering your compass. You remain anchored even while navigating difficult terrain. Standing in truth and integrity refines leadership. Whether or not you hold a formal position, people watch how you act under pressure, how you respond to mistakes, how you handle power, and how you treat those who cannot offer you anything in return. Integrity reveals itself most clearly when there is no incentive to be ethical and no immediate consequence for being unethical. In those moments, your choices define you. This stance also frees you from constant performance. When you no longer need to maintain a false image, your energy is released for meaningful action. You are no longer managing contradictions or covering gaps between your words and your deeds. This coherence creates calm. Decisions become simpler because they are guided by principle rather than impulse or fear. Truth and integrity are not rigid, they are alive. They require ongoing attention and adjustment. As you learn, grow, and encounter new information, standing in truth may require you to revise previous positions. Integrity does not resist this evolution, it demands it. What remains constant is your commitment to honesty and alignment, not your attachment to being right. Ultimately, standing in truth and integrity is an act of respect for life itself. It acknowledges that reality deserves to be faced, that values deserve to be lived, and that character is formed through repeated conscious choice. It is not dramatic, but it is formidable. It does not seek recognition, but it commands it. And in a world saturated with noise, distortion, and compromise, the quiet force of a person who stands unwaveringly in truth and integrity becomes unmistakable. Fear and complacency are not always loud or obvious. More often, they are subtle companions that settle into daily life unnoticed. Fear whispers caution until caution hardens into paralysis. Complacency lulls with comfort until comfort turns into stagnation. Rejecting them is not a single dramatic act, but a sustained internal resistance, a conscious refusal to surrender your agency to forces that thrive on inaction. To reject fear and complacency is to reclaim authorship over your own movement. Fear often disguises itself as wisdom. It tells you to wait until conditions are perfect, until certainty is guaranteed, until risk is eliminated. But certainty is an illusion, and perfection is a delay tactic. Fear survives by exaggerating consequences and minimizing your capacity to respond. It magnifies what might go wrong while ignoring your resilience, adaptability, and intelligence. Rejecting fear does not mean denying danger. It means refusing to let imagined outcomes dictate your present choices. Complacency is fear's quieter partner. Where fear agitates, complacency soothes. It convinces you that things are good enough. That effort can be postponed. That vigilance is unnecessary. It thrives in routine, comfort, and familiarity. Complacency does not demand surrender all at once. It erodes ambition incrementally. A small compromise here, a delay there, until movement feels unnecessary and urgency feels intrusive. Rejecting fear begins with recognition. You notice when your thoughts default to avoidance rather than evaluation, when you dismiss possibilities not because they are wrong, but because they are uncomfortable. Fear often frames itself as realism, but realism assesses both risk and potential. Fear only assesses risk. Once recognized, fear loses some of its authority. It cannot command what has been named. Rejecting complacency requires equal awareness. You begin to question habits that once served you but now limit you. You ask whether comfort has become a cage, whether routine has replaced intention. Complacency resists these questions because questioning threatens its hold. Yet the act of questioning alone begins to break inertia. Awareness disrupts autopilot. There is a discipline to rejection. You do not wait for fear to disappear before acting, because fear rarely disappears on its own. You move while it is present, refusing to grant it veto power. Action becomes the antidote. Each step taken in spite of fear weakens its grip, replacing imagined catastrophe with lived experience. You learn that discomfort is survivable, that mistakes are instructive, and that progress often follows uncertainty. Complacency is challenged through deliberate discomfort. You choose growth over ease, learning over familiarity, responsibility over convenience. This does not mean constant struggle or self-punishment. It means refusing to let ease become your highest value. You remember that comfort is a reward, not a purpose. When comfort becomes the goal, vitality fades. When growth is the goal, comfort finds its proper place. Fear often narrows your vision, making the world feel smaller than it is. Rejecting it expands your perspective. You begin to see options where you once saw walls, paths where you once saw dead ends. This expansion is not reckless optimism, it is restored proportion. You recognize that failure is not final, that setbacks are not identity, and that effort itself carries dignity regardless of outcome. Complacency shrinks time. It convinces you that there will always be later, always another chance, always more opportunity. Rejecting it restores the value of now. You understand that time is not merely passing, it is being spent. Each moment invested in avoidance or numbness is a moment not invested in creation, contribution, or growth. This realization sharpens your presence. Rejecting fear also reshapes how you relate to uncertainty. Instead of demanding guarantees, you develop confidence in your ability to respond. You stop asking, "What if it goes wrong?" as your primary question and begin asking, "What will I do if it does?" This shift is subtle but powerful. It transfers focus from external control to internal capability. Complacency often hides behind entitlement. It suggests that past effort justifies present inertia, that previous success excuses current neglect. Rejecting it requires humility. You acknowledge that momentum must be maintained, that relevance must be earned repeatedly, and that stewardship of your abilities is ongoing. Past victories do not protect against future decay. There is a moral element to rejecting fear and complacency. Fear can keep you silent when truth needs a voice. Complacency can keep you passive when injustice requires action. In these moments, rejection becomes an ethical stance. You choose courage over safety and responsibility over ease, not because it is comfortable, but because it is right. This rejection also strengthens self-respect. Each time you act despite fear, Each time you disrupt complacency, you reinforce trust in yourself. You become someone who follows through, who does not abandon conviction at the first sign of resistance. This trust compounds. Confidence grows not from success alone, but from consistency of effort. Rejecting fear and complacency does not eliminate rest, reflection, or caution. It refines them. Rest becomes recovery, not escape. Reflection becomes preparation, not avoidance. Caution becomes discernment, not paralysis. Balance is restored, not lost. Over time, this stance reshapes your identity. You are no longer defined by what you avoid, but by what you engage. You become responsive rather than reactive, intentional rather than habitual. Fear may still visit, complacency may still tempt, but neither holds dominion. You have learned to recognize them, challenge them, and move forward regardless. In rejecting fear and complacency, you reclaim momentum. You choose motion over stagnation, responsibility over comfort, and courage over illusion. This choice is made daily, sometimes hourly, in small decisions that accumulate into a decisive trajectory. And in that sustained refusal to surrender your agency, a quiet strength emerges, steady, grounded, and unyielding. Advancing with courage and purpose is the movement that follows awakening, truth, and resistance. It is not a rush forward fueled by impulse, nor is it a hesitant step taken only when the path is fully illuminated. It is a deliberate progression guided by inner alignment, where courage supplies the force and purpose provides the direction. Without courage, purpose remains an idea. Without purpose, courage becomes reckless. Together they create momentum that endures. Courage is often misunderstood as the absence of fear, but fear is not the enemy of advancement. Indecision is. Courage is the capacity to act while fear is present, to acknowledge uncertainty without surrendering to it. It is a trained response, strengthened through repetition. Each time you choose to move despite doubt, courage becomes less dramatic and more reliable. It stops being an emotional surge and becomes a steady condition. Purpose is equally misunderstood. It is not a single grand mission revealed in a moment of clarity, nor is it limited to vocation or achievement. Purpose is orientation. It is the reason behind your movement, the principle that shapes your decisions, the value that informs your priorities. Purpose answers the question of why you advance, not just where you are going. It keeps motion from becoming mere activity. Advancing requires commitment to forward motion, even when progress feels slow or invisible. Many abandon their path not because it is wrong, but because it does not produce immediate affirmation. Courage sustains effort through these quiet stretches. Purpose reminds you that value is not measured only by recognition or speed. Some of the most consequential movement happens beneath the surface, where foundations are laid and strength is accumulated. Advancing with courage and purpose also demands discernment. Not every opportunity is aligned, and not every challenge is meant to be confronted directly. Courage without discernment becomes aggression. Purpose without discernment becomes rigidity. Advancement requires the wisdom to know when to push, when to adapt, and when to hold your ground. This wisdom grows through attention, reflection, and humility. There will be resistance. Advancement disrupts equilibrium, both within you and around you. Internal resistance appears as doubt, fatigue, or the temptation to retreat into familiarity. External resistance appears as criticism, obstruction, or misunderstanding. Courage steadies you against both. Purpose anchors you so that resistance does not redefine your direction. You learn to distinguish between feedback that refines you and opposition that merely tests your resolve. Advancing does not mean abandoning patience. Impatience fractures purpose, causing you to outrun your own readiness. True advancement respects process. It allows growth to mature rather than forcing outcomes prematurely. Courage gives you the endurance to remain committed without becoming reckless. Purpose gives you the patience to wait without becoming passive. There is also responsibility in advancement. Moving forward changes not only your position, but your influence. As you advance, your choices affect others more directly. Courage ensures that you do not shrink from this responsibility. Purpose ensures that you wield influence with care rather than ego. Advancement that lacks responsibility corrodes trust. Advancement guided by purpose builds stability. Advancing with courage and purpose refines identity. You stop defining yourself by intentions alone and begin defining yourself by follow-through. You become someone who acts, not merely someone who plans. This shift alters how you perceive obstacles. Challenges are no longer signs to stop, but signals to adapt. Setbacks are no longer verdicts on your worth, but information for recalibration. Purpose also protects you from distraction. As you advance, options multiply. Not all are aligned. Some offer speed without substance, recognition without meaning. Purpose acts as a filter, helping you decline what would dilute your direction. Courage supports these refusals, especially when declining costs you approval or advantage. You learn that advancement is not about accumulating more, but about moving truer. Advancing requires consistency. Grand gestures may inspire, but steady effort transforms. Courage shows itself in persistence, in returning to the work after disappointment, in choosing integrity when compromise would accelerate progress. Purpose reminds you why consistency matters, even when motivation fluctuates. Together, they form resilience. There is also sacrifice in advancement. Some attachments cannot travel with you. Old identities, outdated beliefs, and comfortable limitations may need to be released. Courage enables the letting go. Purpose clarifies what is worth carrying forward. This shedding is not loss for its own sake, it is refinement, you travel lighter, more focused, more capable. Advancing with courage and purpose reshapes time. You stop living reactively, responding only to what demands attention, and begin living proactively, investing in what compounds over time. You think in terms of trajectory rather than immediacy. Purpose stretches your horizon. Courage keeps you moving toward it. As you advance, you may not always feel powerful, but you will feel aligned. This alignment produces a quiet confidence that does not depend on constant reassurance. You trust your direction because it is anchored internally. You are less swayed by comparison, less disrupted by noise. Advancement becomes less about proving and more about becoming. Ultimately, advancing with courage and purpose is an act of fidelity to what you have recognized as true. It is the refusal to remain static after awakening, the commitment to embody what you know rather than merely affirm it. It is movement informed by conviction, sustained by discipline, and guided by meaning. You advance not because the path is easy, but because remaining still would betray your awareness. You advance not to escape where you are, but to fulfill what has been entrusted to you. Step by step, with courage steady and purpose clear, you move forward, and in that movement you become.